Welcome. I would like to just give a brief background of the annual event, which has been to commemorate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. And from my point of view, I think it's very important to stress what his distinctive contribution was. It won't take more than 3 or 4 hours to do this, so you needn't worry. But I can contrast Dr. King with probably all of us. All of us are ethical partialists. We all believe in helping the poor and in contributing charity and doing the right thing. But we also have a pronounced sense of our own self-interest. And we also realize that people can't change things overnight. And so our resources are spent minimally to improve the world, but for the most part, to improve ourselves. After all, BMWs are really cool. Dr. King, in my view, was totally antithetical to that. He was clearly an ethical holist. He believed that his life could not be meaningful until everyone else's life was. And let me quote. He said, "I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be." These words of interconnectedness really goes back to ancient times and biblical times. Dr. King answered the question of whether or not he was his brother and sister's keeper by saying, absolutely. He couldn't imagine the kind of separation that perhaps we have here today. His concern about racism and poverty and war was fundamental. And essentially, he was opposed to racism because it really said, you can't be like me. He was opposed to poverty because it said, you aren't like me. And he opposed war because any of the interconnectedness between and among the various peoples of the world was completely shattered. Now, I just want to say that I actually participated in a peace demonstration in 1967 with Dr. King. I was 1 year old at the time, and it was from Central Park to the UN. And Dr. King, not only because of that march, but because of who he was a person who I admired perhaps more than any other political leader or social leader that were around when I was growing up. One of the things we want to do with this event is to try to make his life clear, or at least more clear to our students. Obviously, many of our students were born after his death, and therefore they related to him in the same way I related to Lincoln when I was growing up. He was, and I didn't know him, by the way. He was a very important person who I admired, but he wasn't vivid and real to me. Martin Luther King was vivid and real to me, and what I hope is that we can convey part of the reality to our students. He's not just a man in a book. He was a person that perhaps contributed to more of the fundamental values of this country than than any other leader. At this time, I would like to express a kind of departure from what we usually do. This is the first time that we are going to have, as part of the program, a student, Mr. Charles Gibbs, who worked passionately and dedicatedly and exhaustively to arrange this panel, and the topic was suggested forcefully and persuasively by him. It is true that his presence on the panel is partly a result that he threatened to take every course I teach if I didn't put him on the panel. But actually, it wasn't much of a threat because I welcomed him. He's a remarkable young man, and let me introduce Mr. Charles Gibbs.